I wonder, Sherry, if we should play some music as people are coming in these 5 minutes, so that it's more exciting.
Maybe to do
Like
this
elevator jazz. You're just waiting.
Like the same thing, ease people in the morning. And yeah.
Say that again, Brandon?
I was saying, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Something.
As people are joining, we'll go ahead and begin. My name is Shekufe Zanji. I'm the Global Technical Lead with the Early Childhood Development Action Network. And really pleased to welcome you guys to week 2 and the final week of the Masterclass series. Let us know how many sessions everyone has joined from, sure, we can see your screen. And we're excited to get going with you on session number 7. So if you want to go to the next slide, Shreya. Great. So we are now in theme 4 on equitable ECD systems change and evaluation methods and example. Of course, the series is co-curated by NORC, and excited to have Meg Hargreaves in the call today on the session today, as she has been an important pillar in putting this masterclass series together. So warm welcome to Meg. Next, Shreya. So this systems thinking initiative is a collaboration with Harvard University. We're very grateful to Porticus for their support. Next. And it's that we have 4 pillars in our initiative: systems research, systems investing, systems measurement, and systems design and implementation. This series is part of the systems measurement efforts. And just a reminder, we're now halfway through. So if you have watched all of last week, that means you are eligible for a certificate. The certificate is a virtual certificate that you can use on LinkedIn and other areas. Remember, you need to complete 7 out of 14 sessions. It doesn't all have to be live. You can watch recordings, but please, you have to make sure the survey is completed. Next. After each session, you will have access to everything. So if you go onto the website, maybe my colleague Hannah can put the website in the chat. If you go there, you should be able to have access to all the sessions that have happened last week, the 6 sessions, including the recordings, resources, and so on. And a reminder that you can go over to ECD Connect as well, and all those links should be shared in the chat with you. Next. Finally, each session sort of has a similar outline. We do welcome introductions. There will be the masterclass training, the dialogue with the early childhood expert, and participant Q&A. Next. Just a bit of housekeeping. Please, we welcome all chatting. So just make sure you select everyone when you're doing that, so everyone can see it, not just hosts and panelists. And for all your questions, strongly advise you to put them into the Q&A box. The Q&A box will be monitored by the NORC team, and they will even write responses there. So you can look at the answered responses as well, and be sure to vote for the questions that you like as well, so that they can move up the list, because we obviously cannot get to every question. Next. And of course, we have Spanish translation available. Again, huge thank you to the UNICEF LACRO team. If you click on interpretation, select Spanish, you should have it there. Our wonderful translator, Mitzi, is with us. Again, big thank you to Mitzi. Next. Back one. All right, and so I'm going to introduce the speakers from today's sessions. We have Meg Hargreaves. She's a senior fellow at NORC at the University of Chicago, and she's widely recognized for her methodological expertise and experiences directing research and evaluations of complex multi-level systems change initiatives that address programmatic, institutional structure, and systemic inequities in a range of areas. So we're really excited to have you, Meg. And along with her, we have Dr. Chandria Jones. She's the principal research scientist in public health and affiliate staff at the Center of Equity Research at NORC at the University of Chicago. She specializes in behavioral health, health equity, and health communications. She spearheads culturally responsive and equitable evaluations and research integrating community engagement and participatory methods. And finally, we have Brandon Coffey Borden. He is a senior research scientist with NORC at the University of Chicago with methodological expertise in evaluating the implementation and outcomes of systems change in place-based efforts to enhance well-being and advance equity. So we have a superstar team from NORC. Again, NORC is a co-curator of this series, so we're really excited to have them discuss a really important topic today on equitable systems change, learning, and evaluation methods to support early childhood systems improvement, reform, and transformation. And finally, our early childhood expert who needs no introduction is Dr. Hiro Yoshikawa, who is a professor in applied psychology at the New York University. He's a community and developmental psychologist who conducts work on child and youth development in partnerships with NGOs and ministries in Latin America, South Asia, and Middle East, as well as the United States. His work studies the effects of public policies and programs related to immigration, early childhood, youth development, and poverty reduction on children's development. So really warm welcome to everyone, and looking forward to the session. So over to you, to the NORC team. Thank you.
So let's start this. So thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate your interest in this topic. Today's session is going to focus on equity-centered systems change initiatives and their evaluation. There are initiatives that seek to address systemic inequities, and this is a special case of systems evaluation. And so it requires evaluation approaches that integrate not only systems thinking and complexity-informed evaluation methods, as well as culturally responsive equity evaluation methods, but also an understanding of the system's leadership and capacity that's needed not only to carry off the initiative itself, but also to have a successful evaluation. So we start by applying an equity lens to the problem of healthy child development in this session, and we show the integration of these three disciplines and how they inform an equitable system evaluation and learning framework that Brandon, Chandria, and I have created and have been using for a while. So let's go to the system objectives, the session objectives. So we are hoping to help you identify the evaluation processes that build the capacity of a system evaluation leadership team, and help you to understand the root causes of system inequities, that help you clarify systems change strategies that are centered on equity. This is an important element. Equity cannot be seen as a side outcome. It has to be centered in the strategies that are used. We also hope that you will understand the co-design of a culturally responsive and adaptive evaluation strategy, gather diverse information sources, and learn how to work with key interested parties in interpreting and reporting and providing transparent findings, as well as using the framework to support your ECD systems change goals. So that's the understanding piece of this. We also have some exercises that can help you practice applying and adapting these various methods to your own programs and your own ECD goals and contexts and communities. Next slide. So we'll start with a little more personal introduction. Thank you, Shekafe, for the official descriptions of our careers, but we'll add some personal elements to it as well. As Shekafe said, I have been working in the area of equity-centered systems change evaluation for over 20 years at multiple levels, at community and regional and national and global levels, but also have been working at these levels in health, child development, criminal justice, and trauma and resilience and climate change. But outside of work, I live on a lake in northern Michigan. I and my spouse live near and enjoy being with our family and our friends. So Chandria is next.
Okay, thanks, Meg. And greetings, everyone. I'm Chandria Jones. I use she, her pronouns. And as Shekafe said in my introduction, my work really focuses on culturally responsive and equitable evaluation and research and how that applies to a variety of contexts. At my core, I really am a health equity researcher and evaluation person, but I also like to bring that systems focus into the work that I do. And on a personal level, I love spending time with my family, my dog. I'm really into Disney, and I'm committed to elevating the voice of historically marginalized or disadvantaged populations in my work. I'll turn it over to you, Brandon.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Coffey Borden. As was said in my introduction, I view myself as an evaluator and capacity builder, working in the area of systems change and culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. In addition to that, I'm fortunate to be the father of two amazing daughters. I am a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother to an older sister. And I love books, television, film, anything media, especially science fiction. It's my favorite genre. And I also love to cook. I view myself as an amateur chef. So it's great to meet everyone. And next we can move into additional background on framing the problem and kind of really what brings us here. So you can move to the next slide. So we just want to take a moment to kind of frame the discussion today in recognition of the scientific advances that have occurred over the last several decades that have furthered our understanding of the close and ongoing interaction between our bodies and then the conditions that our bodies experience. So noting that these environmental factors reflect where one lives, what one eats, the quality of air one breathes, one's social interactions and relationships, among other factors. And that's, of course, closely related to the idea of the social determinants of health from the field of public health, which focuses on those upstream factors that shape behavior and influence health, whether education, employment, income, wealth, one's physical environment, the social environment, access to transportation, and similar factors. And so really, as highlighted in the graphic here, the influence of these conditions and these environments starts early in life, and therefore, an individual's current circumstances are at least in part a consequence of the events and experiences that occurred earlier in life, as well as things that are happening in the present. Next slide. Right. So the recognition of this kind of trajectory model of the life course just really highlights how an individual's life may be changed either negatively or positively at each stage of life. And in this way, again, the well-being of adolescents and adults is shaped in part by experiences during the prenatal and early childhood periods, where we are now as a consequence of where we've been. Unfortunately, as Meg had mentioned, these areas have become increasingly recognized as sensitive times for development. That's contributed to investments and supports for young children over the last several decades, and also increased public awareness about the importance of these developmental periods. But even recognizing that, of course, far too many children still enter adolescence with some of the scars of childhood adversity, toxic stress, exposure to environmental toxins, child maltreatment, food insecurity, limited access to high quality early care and education. And of course, we also know that opportunities are not equally accessible across all young children. There's inequitable investments in public infrastructure or family support services, the persistence of segregation and discrimination based on identities like gender, cultural background, linguistic background, ethnic and racial background, religious background, geographic locations, and similar identities, which creates pervasive disparities in outcomes for infants and children. And so to address these challenges, we know that we need to take a systems approach. These complex challenges are beyond the scope of any one program or organization or institution or sector to solve. They require multiple actors. Oftentimes solutions are not clear and can be characterized by disagreement about the causes and promising solutions. There's sometimes uncertainty between action and downstream impact. And these problems require innovative approaches to develop mutually reinforcing pathways to address these problems. And so again, in essence, you need a systems approach. We know that environments and conditions matter, especially during the early childhood period. We know systems can shape those environments and conditions that we experience. And so we need systems change efforts to improve early childhood outcomes and address inequities. And for those systems change efforts really to be maximized, they really require reflection, learning, and adaptation, along with an equity lens. And that's really the foundation of the systems and complexity informed approaches and the culture responsive and equitable evaluation approaches that we'll be talking about today. So I'll go ahead and turn over to Chandra.
Thanks, Brandon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the foundational thinking that kind of brought us here today and to the framework that we'll be telling you a little bit more about. So North Center on Equity Research conducts what we call equity science, which is the study and practice of efforts to advance equity across social and behavioral sciences and in the real world. And equity science is considered to be like a rigorous, systematic, and methodologically diverse process to guide, collect, and organize knowledge that is focused on the inclusion and experiences of people, especially historically marginalized or minoritized people, for the scientific generation of knowledge and more precise evidence to create and promote equitable programs, campaigns, policies, and systems of access and power for all people. Inclusive and equitable research refers to the methodological approach within the domain of equity science. And INE research, as we sometimes call it, really is a collaborative research that embraces a range of theoretical frameworks and methods focused on democratizing the research process, centering and empowering the people who are researched, and examining power dynamics to dismantle unequal power hierarchies and systems. While there's no one way to conduct INE research, there are guiding principles that we use. And those principles include positionality and self-reflection, culture and community engagement, democratization, and systems focus. And it's that fourth principle of systems focus that we'll talk about more today. But the INE research framework as a whole is a structural change framework, which aims to transform the process of how we conduct research. And an overview of the framework is provided in the pre-reading materials. So I mentioned that fourth principle of systems focus. And this principle really focuses on systems and structural change. This means asking questions and investigating the systems and structures that foster social inequities rather than narrowly investigating individual behaviors and experiences. Implementation of this principle really requires asking questions that force the examination of how inequities are created and reproduced through upstream factors like governmental or organizational policies, thus providing a blueprint for how to dismantle those systems that cause the most social harm. And it's this focus on systems that is how we created the Equitable Systems Evaluation and Learning Framework, which I think we're going to go to Meg. We'll talk more about next.
Thanks, Chandra. This approach was developed and tested over years and then formally introduced to the American Evaluation Association in 2022. And it's based on our collective group's experiences and our methodological strengths. So this framework it looks linear, it looks like a cycle. It's not necessarily linear. You can jump into initiative at any of these points if previous points have already been done, or you could come in and review what's already been done and then jump into active participation as needed. These can also happen somewhat, not only in sequence, but they can overlap so that you can be preparing for the evaluation as you begin to assess the evaluation, for example. We also see this as an iterative cycle. So this is an ongoing feedback loop of data collection, interpretation, and adaptation. And then with a real emphasis on use of the findings to then renew and review our approach, look at gaps in capacity and see how they can be built, refine and adjust the strategies as we learn and as the initiative continues, and then adjust the measures as the dynamic of the evaluation evolves. So let's go and talk about each specific set of steps. So the first 3 steps are about pulling together an eclectic learning and evaluation team that covers a range of skill sets and lived experiences and subject matter expertise. And it's not the same team like a hammer that's the same for every evaluation. You've got to assemble a group that's appropriate to each evaluation. The second piece is about working with our primary players and interested stakeholders and users of the evaluation to map and understand the situation, its context, and the complex problems that are being addressed. Then the third one is assessing capacity. And this is about reviewing and assessing the capacity and governance of the initiative and to lead and manage not only the scope of change and work that's being done at multiple leverage points, but also its focus and centering of equitable change strategies. And this is important because many initiatives call themselves equitable, but they see equity as a separate add-on scope of work when it should be central to every part of the initiative at every level. So then after those first 3, the co-design process is really meant to ensure that key voices are included in the design process, that methods are appropriate to the system's dynamics, and that the data collection, analysis, and interpretation and reporting methods are culturally appropriate. Then we get to the actual steps of doing the evaluation work, and that means adapting the methods as we go along at multiple levels, and then collecting the data using mixed methods to incorporate both qualitative and quantitative methods to track that kind of change, not only the processes, but the outcomes of the work, and then analyzing the data. That's interpreting the data with a comprehensive understanding of the system and its context, and reporting and using the findings. So we'll go through each of these 8 steps, and I just want to emphasize that before we go on, that each one of these steps or elements is meant to incorporate these 3 disciplines at every stage. So I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Thank you, Matt. We can move to the next slide. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with the first element of preparing for the evaluation that Meg highlighted. And that's really establishing an evaluation team that has the knowledge, the background, and experience to complete an evaluation of a systems change effort that centers equity. And here we've highlighted a few competencies that have come out of the evaluation literature and our experience that are especially important. So probably unsurprisingly, an understanding of systems thinking, systems and complexity-informed evaluation methods, as well as culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. Both these areas from almost like a philosophical frame, as well as being proficient in specific methods and tools and methodologies in these areas. Self-awareness and positionality, just simply recognizing that our lens as evaluators influences all aspects of our evaluation work, and the importance here of making sure to understand the limitations of our own knowledge and experience, being able to value different perspectives, and that allows us to better understand the complexity of the situations that we encounter. Interpersonal and facilitation skills, the importance here of recognizing that the sensitive topics that underlie systems change and equity work require evaluators to listen, be appropriately assertive, to engage in conflict management, to support dialogue, to work effectively with interested parties involved in the work. Flexibility and malleability, the ability to adopt and understand other viewpoints and worldviews is really critical, both to grappling with the complexity that's inherent in systems change work, as well as avoiding the ethnocentrism, which undermines cultural competency and equity. And diversity of team member background and experiences. Here we're recognizing recent research that notes that diverse teams tend to solve problems more effectively. Sometimes they tend to be more innovative, maybe more responsive to end user needs. So having diversity of backgrounds and experiences on the evaluation team is critical, while also recognizing the need to have evaluation team members that have lived experiences in common with those who are at the center of the evaluation. And then, in terms of thinking about some key principles for forming that evaluation team, clarifying the needed skills, competencies, and backgrounds. I've just mentioned a few. Of course, there's going to be some that are context specific, whether you need team members that have specific, specific linguistic skills, or team members that understand social network analysis, whatever that might be, but recognizing both the general and context specific competencies there. Determine the project structure. Is it going to be more of an internal evaluation team or external evaluation team? What other structural elements need to be considered? Completing a recruitment process if needed to locate an evaluation team or to fill gaps on the team. And then preparing and orienting team members to the evaluation, helping them understand the systems change effort that will be evaluated, introducing them to each other, familiarizing each other with background and skills and experiences on the team. Understanding and describing the project objectives and in the structure and those elements of the project. We're providing that grounding and introduction, and then really building and supporting the evaluation team's capacity over time. And so the team might benefit from additional capacity building or exercises based on individual or collective needs. It could be, for example, facilitating opportunities for the team to reflect on their cultural background and their experiences, building knowledge in certain areas that are relevant to the project. Equally important is just recognizing that the issues at the center of equity work are both professional and highly personal. And for example, evaluation activities might reignite past experiences of past experience of discrimination or physical or mental harm that was caused based on their identity. The subject matter of the evaluation might expose evaluation team members to vicarious trauma when we're considering, issues like ACEs or, the toll that might be taken, or child welfare, and the toll that might be taken from, and the emotional burden of listening to and processing accounts of those kinds of experiences. And so for those reasons, the evaluation team and leadership needs to consider the risk that might exist to team members, develop procedures to identify when those issues arise, and then provide concrete supports to promote team members' health and well-being. Let's move to the next slide. And so just want to take a moment to note the importance of reflective practice, starting at the beginning of the evaluation and moving throughout, and recognizing the importance of both self-oriented reflective practice, taking the time to look inside oneself, considers one's own activities and practice, and thinking about how that might inform work going forward, as well as collectively as a group, thinking about group processes, interactions, and activities. And trying to arrive at insights and meetings that are jointly constructed. And here are a few examples of different approaches or tools that could be used to support reflective practice: after action reviews, critical system heuristics, and utilizing some of the questions inherent there as reflected for reflective practice. Just a couple of tools and approaches there. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide. All right, another key step in preparing for the evaluation is starting early to identify and engage those who have an interest in or are impacted by or that have influence over the evaluation effort. And when we're talking about interests, we're not necessarily talking about the degree to which a particular interested party has a general interest in the evaluation or their desired level of involvement, but also moving beyond that to consider the moral, ethical, and legal rights that individuals and groups have to be involved or consulted as regarding the evaluation. Individuals and group, in terms of impacted, the individuals and groups that might be impacted by the evaluation positively, negatively, or in mixed ways, and then influence, thinking about those who may have various levels of influence over the evaluation project, depending on their ability to change the process and the outcomes. And so important to go through a process to identify these interested parties. Again, we provide a few examples of different tools here. And then using that information, the outputs of that process to develop and revisit an interested party analysis and engagement plan to remain adaptive, right? So in that plan outlining what is the purpose of the engagement process, how will interested parties be recruited to engage in the engagement process. For example, if you're going to establish some kind of evaluation advisory board, how will those members be recruited and onboarded and those sorts of things? What are the phases of the engagement process? What is the level of engagement for different interested parties? How will the process be implemented? What kind of engagement methods will be used over the course of the work? What resources are being allocated or needed to support the engagement process, and being very thoughtful about that. And thinking about how will those who are being engaged provide feedback about the process, and then how will you determine success? What measures will you use to know whether you're achieving your goals for engagement? Next slide. And so we, in recognition that there's, a lot of knowledge in this virtual space, we wanted to invite people to feel free to reflect on either individually or feel free to put things in the chat, any strategies or approaches that you've used in the past to successfully prepare and support an evaluation team or identify interested parties and develop an engagement plan. All right, let's move to the next slide. All right, you can go ahead and move to the next one. Okay, so next we're going to talk about assessing the situation, the step that Meg highlighted earlier. So one approach to getting a better understanding of the situation that's at the center of the evaluation is systems mapping. And the systems map can really provide a comprehensive and rich and really an evolving story of the context and key players' efforts to shift system behavior to arrive at a better place. And so in thinking about how to go about that process, think about what is the goal of your systems mapping effort, what is the scope, what are the boundaries of the system, seeking to clarify underlying assumptions about the situation or problem, establishing a common language to facilitate further efforts, thinking about the degree of participation, who's going to be involved. We'd encourage trying to include the greatest range of voices as possible within available resources, recognizing that the input you receive directly impacts the quality of that final systems map. And then building your map, deciding on a mapping approach, and then moving forward with building your map, using that selected approach, and working with those interested parties to form a comprehensive visualization of what the system looks like. And then really sharing and refining that story, taking the map, developing a story of what does it really mean in terms of the situation the group is trying to tackle, and then revising, refining that story based on the feedback received, and then using that map to act in ways that are going to inform the evaluation and ideally inform the systems change effort itself to advance the systems change goals and equity considerations. All right, let's move to the next slide. And so also wanted to just take a moment to recognize that evaluation teams and leaders have to make decisions and act strategically. And, at times, teams may benefit from tools to help define an approach or chart a path forward or figure out how to allocate finite resources. Recognizing that there's no one size fits all approach that's applicable every time to every situation. But there are some tools here that can support that, SWOT analysis, pestle analysis in its various forms, even soft systems methodology could be applied to those kind of situations. I just want to recognize the importance of that and highlight that. All right, move to the next slide, please. All right, and again, we would just invite you to, in the chat or wherever you are, please reflect on some strategies and approaches you've used to successfully map systems and understand situations in context. All right, next slide. So next we'll talk about assessing the capacity of the systems change effort. And here we would recommend just starting with considering what is the systems change initiative trying to do with a particular focus on equity implications. Oftentimes this will be outlined, for example, if an evaluator is coming in later in the process, this might be outlining existing theory of change, documents reflecting the initiative's mission or vision and the like. But making sure to review and interrogate those documents a bit, especially in terms of an existing theory of change, to consider things like, is the theory of change perhaps too linear and it doesn't capture some of the system dynamics or feedback that might be present in the system? Is it balanced? Is it comprehensive enough while also being tangible and usable to inform the work that's being done? Are the key elements called out within that theory of change? Does it reflect the root causes that drive inequitable outcomes? Does the theory of change consider the opportunity for retrenchment and include responsive strategies to that? Noting that systems often resist change through a process of incremental progress followed by retrenchment, a step forward and sometimes 1 or 2 steps back. And finding ways to use creative strategies to try to halt that process in its tracks. And then thinking about, does it include the full range of voices, right? Expertise from researchers, from practitioners, from frontline staff, from policymakers, and from those most impacted by the work and members of the community. And so thinking about that, trying to understand what is the scope of change that the effort is really aiming at. Is it more incremental? Is it trying to refine existing practices and routines to enhance positive aspects of the system or mitigate existing negative aspects of it? Is it more focused on reform, adjusting existing practices and routines and structures to change the way the system functions? Or is it more focused on transformation, really forging a fundamentally different system by reshaping norms, changing beliefs and attitudes, and shifting system goals? Identifying the leverage points that are being targeted, those places within the system where a small shift in one area can yield significant changes in another. And then also understand the change strategies. To successfully address those leverage points, system change efforts may implement a range of different kinds of strategies. For example, an initiative that might be seeking to implement universal, high-quality early childhood education might use community organizing as a means to mobilize parents to push leaders to adopt the policy. At the same time, they might be using communication strategies to increase community awareness and support of policy change. There might be advocacy groups that are directly trying to engage with policymakers, using their relationships with leaders to try to generate buy-in. All those strategies coming together to try to support that policy change effort. Next slide. Another key question is really to consider how is the systems change effort organized and the degree of equity in structure and process. And here, there are a few considerations, for example, around systems leadership, as Meg stressed earlier, recognizing and trying to understand what individuals or institutions are really exerting leadership to catalyze and enable and support systems level change, to mobilize actors in new ways to address their shared goal. Management and administration, trying to understand how is the initiative coordinated or structured so that key tasks and activities and deliverables are being completed to achieve the desired outcome. And then governance, like what are those rules and practices and processes by which change agents are relating to each other to accomplish their their shared goals. And in here, we've just got 3 examples of different structures that might be relevant. One is more of a shared structure where there's not necessarily a formal administrative entity, and all the different groups or organizations involved share or contribute to management or leadership in some way. Another might be where there's a specific lead entity. So maybe the entity exerting leadership or management, administration is themselves a member of the group that's seeking change. And then another structure might be there's a separate administrative organization. So the change agents, the organizations that involve come together to say, we're going to create a separate entity to shepherd this process, to hold it, to move it forward. And that would be that separate administrative organization. So these efforts can be structured in different ways, and you're really trying to dig in and understand what that structure is and who's involved and who is completing key activities. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Meg to continue the discussion about capacity.
Thanks, Brandon. So I know that people think, well, why are we talking so much about capacity assessment? For several reasons. Part of it is that we have been evaluators of initiatives that didn't consider capacity, and so we were unable to track change because of a lack of capacity and ability to actually implement the initiative. And that is just a crying shame from our standpoint. If there isn't a capacity to do it, then it's a really hard sell to actually, or it's almost impossible. It's not feasible to actually get the work done. So this is either a wake-up call, or it's done to assure that there is enough capacity for the group or the leadership, however it's defined, to actually carry out the work so that we can do the evaluation. Often when that doesn't happen, we get pulled into helping to support and build capacity, which is fine, but it wasn't necessarily expected, and it can really slow down an initiative. So when we think about building capacity, it happens often from the bottom up. First, we have to look at capacity in terms of individuals' understanding of systems thinking and equity and their knowledge and their skills, not only in understanding the key concepts, but actually convening groups and leading change processes, either individually or as a group. Then we look at organizational capacity. It can be that people lower down in an organization are charged with a systems change initiative, and yet the leadership and the culture of the organization does not support equity enough, doesn't support the change initiative enough. And so understanding the capacity at an organization level is crucial. Then there can be a building of organizational capacity, but it's working with a network or collaboration with other partners that don't have the infrastructure, the resources, or the governance to work together effectively to make change happen. And again, that could be, or there's power dynamics or imbalances within the network that impedes the progress. And so that's an important element to be aware of, to track. And then across networks at community or regional levels, people talk about the ability of networks to work together, or platforms that connect networks and coalitions to be able to work together across larger geographies. That is an expensive capacity, but an important capacity to develop. And so we're not only talking about assessing the capacity at the very beginning of an initiative, but it can be an important part of an initiative to develop capacity in all of these levels as the initiative continues. And that is an important marker of change, and it's important to be able to document improvement in capacity at all of these levels as an important precursor in building the conditions that support larger and more effective change. So this is why we make a big deal of this. It's not just, we can't assume, like conventional evaluation, that the inputs are assumed, they exist, the resources are there. Often they have to be built as the initiative goes along. So let's go to the next slide. So we've worked together for years across multiple initiatives to look for valid and reliable measures of capacity. And this is a collective community capacity survey, or C3 survey, that has been tested over 3 or 4 initiatives with at least 50 different coalitions and networks to iteratively test and improve what was already an evidence-based evaluation survey that was based on a year of research of the best practices in community change efforts. And so this survey has 6 domains. And the first is the ability to collaborate, to be able to have a group come together with shared goals. And the group is a cross-sector group. And those are 2 subscales that are within that domain. A second piece is about the ability to gather and use data, including data that maps a system and tells you the systemic inequities and root causes of inequities in a system that support the change process, as well as using the data for learning and accountability. The third domain in this survey is looking at whether there's active engagement in change efforts. And this is about the importance of the engagement of diverse groups and the empowerment of diverse groups. This is a single domain because it's so important, or single subscale because it's so important to equity change efforts. Then the fourth cluster has to again look at this issue of leadership. Is it distributed? Are there power imbalances? Is there sufficient governance? What is the communication both inside and outside the group? And what is the equity focus of the initiative? The fifth is looking at differences in looking at equity-oriented strategies, but are they operating at the different levels that I had been mentioning before, looking both at individual change and then also looking at organizational change and institutional change. I'll say more about those measures later, but it's important to, yes, you can focus on a single issue, a single set of strategies targeting a single activity, but it's not going to be systemic. It's not going to be sustained. It's not going to be durable. And so we really emphasize either, if you don't have the capacity to work at multiple levels across multiple sectors at the same time, then work with others who are working at those different levels in those different sectors so that there is more impact to the work that you're trying to do. And again, the final area to look at is this idea of infrastructure. Do you have the infrastructure to actually support the scale of work that is needed to support and sustain durable change? So again, this can seem daunting, and it's okay to start small, to focus on just one area. But if you really are looking for large-scale transformative systemic change and not just an improvement of a single element or a reform of a single area, then it's important to pay attention and at least be honest with yourself about where your initiative is, or your collective leadership is and capacity is, in terms of not spreading yourself too thin and saying that you can do more than you actually can do, or that you work into your goals over time, recognizing the importance of all of these elements. So we have information about this. It's valid, it's reliable, it's translated into Spanish, it's all as well as English. It also can be used in a pre-post, before and after, or change over time to look at time trends and capacity. There's also a retrospective version of this so that you can ask a group, both treatment and control groups. You can compare communities to similarly situated comparison communities and ask what's your capacity now and compare it to how it was a year ago, so that you only have to use the survey once. So it's a useful survey. It's free. It's available. You don't have to use all the elements, but please go ahead and make use of which parts are useful. And so we wanted to give you a feeling for what that feels like to just fill out one of these subscales of the survey. So we're going to go to an actual example. So one of the 11 subscales is about equity. And so we ask 5 equity questions, and we want you to look at each one. And an element of this instrument is that you put in the network name or the coalition name. You also identify the community or the geographic area that you're talking about. And you also adapt this, so you put in the vision statement. So it can be, so think about an initiative you're working on in a particular community. Think about whatever that's called. Think about what it's trying to achieve, what its vision is, and see if how you would answer each of these 5 questions. Is your group doing this not at all, hardly at all, somewhat, a great deal, or completely, or it may not be relevant? So we're actually taking a few minutes here to just pause and have you think about, and it's also possible that you don't know. You're not in a position to know the answer to this, which is fine. So we really wanted to give you a few minutes, sort of take out a piece of paper and think about an initiative, think of one, and think of how you would answer these 5 questions. And let's give you like 2-3 minutes to do this. And then we can respond to questions about this. So go ahead and give it a try. Thank you. It's also very likely that you may be doing much more work in one area than another. That makes a lot of sense because it may be something that is that's the most visible issue that you want to work on. For example, looking at who's in your network. Is it a combination of both nonprofit organizations as well as governmental organizations? Small and large. That's an important element. And also looking at how the power relations are across the members of a group. Thank you for the responses people are providing. This doesn't take long to do. It's about a 20-25 minute survey to take, and it includes a social network question, which can be analyzed and turned into a social network diagram. It's very, very helpful to track in terms of change over time. One can assume that new networks get more integrated and as more people are added, but there can also be community events, catastrophes like COVID that can destroy the cohesion and the connections of a network. We've seen that in a recent initiative, in which the network was much more cohesive, much more connected at the beginning of the initiative than at the end, because COVID, which didn't allow for communication or in-person connections, just destroyed the connections in the network. I want to thank you all for working on this. We'll go to the co-design process next.
Great, thanks, Meg. And feel free to continue adding to the chat as we continue along with the additional steps. And so when we're talking about co-design, we're really honing in on centering equity in your evaluation design and engaging communities, which is very critical. The co-design process includes creating a mutually beneficial process to incorporate the voices of people most impacted by the evaluation. Community members are engaged in different activities, including establishing the questions, learning processes, core concepts, participatory approaches, and methods appropriate to capturing the system dynamics. The purpose of the co-design process is to work with interested parties to understand how the system is constructed and related system dynamics. Co-designing is about power sharing in the planning, designing, and deciding what is included in the evaluation. Power sharing helps to maintain stability, promote inclusivity, and prevent the concentration of power in the hands of just the evaluators. Sharing power is essential to ensure that the evaluation is truly participatory, respects community values, and addresses their needs. The co-design process should be facilitated in a way that encourages open discussion of power sharing and authority, clearly identifies benefits, and explains expectations for participation. The goal is to promote comfortable sharing of thoughts and experiences and use bidirectional knowledge sharing to gain the insights and lived experiences of community members. This will include different activities such as identifying evaluation goals, selecting and categorizing core evaluation measures of interest, developing logic models or theories of change, designing culturally appropriate data collection instruments, designing an equitable systems change evaluation, and finalizing the evaluation plan through a consensus building process. At this point, we want you to sit and reflect on strategies and approaches that you've used to successfully co-design evaluations, and feel free to drop that into the chat. A couple of things to think about when it comes to strategies and approaches for co-designing the evaluation is that you must actively work to overcome any barriers to the participation of community members by using flexible models of convening and methods of contact. So think about how it is that your community members prefer to communicate. Is it through email? Is it phone calls? Is it texting? And when are you meeting? Is it outside traditional work hours? Is it on the weekend? And also setting convenings in neutral settings where there's not a huge inferred power dynamic. And also adequately compensating community partners and participants for their engagement is very important. I'll turn it over to Meg to talk about adapting the methods and metrics.
Thanks, Chandra. So because we're centering this issue of equity, we want to make sure that the process and the outcome measures are measuring at this issue of equity at multiple levels. And so at an individual level, you can think about this as personal self-efficacy, agency, and healing. At an interpersonal level, this is about equality that's free of bias or discrimination. When we want to measure institutional equity, it can be looking at the organization's culture, its diversity, and its inclusion. When we look at structural equity, it's looking at the impact of policies or regulations and rules, or zoning laws, et cetera, and how they impact different geographies and different populations. And to make sure that systemic equity means that there's consistency in equity across all of these levels. So secondly, we want to look at points in time, looking at change over time. And this can be looking at the change and seeing if there is a change in the trajectory of change. Are things getting better? Or are they not? And the pace of change, is change accelerating? We'd like to know both. We also want to go back to the original idea of systems leverage points and to track changes in people's mindsets, in their goals, in the policies that they have, and also in community norms, other program components, as well as their power relations, their connections, their communications flow, and resources. So it's important to look at those leverage points, because theoretically, the theory of change should be addressing, this is a systems change initiative, should be addressing at least one or more of these points. And it's also important not just to get overall aggregate measures, but to think to be working across and measuring change across sectors and levels, and to look at whether there's alignment in changes at these different levels and across these different sectors. It's also important to realize that this is important to use developmental evaluation approaches to adapt the methods as we go along. So let's look at some important equity indicators. A lot of people can confuse equality, that everyone is treated the same, with equity. And so we're going to show you examples of different kinds of equity. Your initiative may only focus on one, but if these other, you should also track these other elements or kinds of inequity to make sure that they don't continue to exist. So you can look at fair and just distribution of resources across and opportunities across groups and geographic locations, consistency in the quality of services or supports and opportunities across different groups and geographic locations, consistency in treatment or the procedures or interactions with people in different groups and locations, and also the level of influence, not only whether people are there, but whether they have influence and their influence over decisions that are impacting their lives and their communities. Finally, we look at and suggest you to consider informational equity, where people have timely access to needed information from different groups and geographic locations. So let's look at collecting the data. So it's important to think that systems evaluation doesn't just use systems-informed methods, but also conventional social research and evaluation methods. It's important to use both in your own primary data collection, as well as your secondary use of administrative data. It's also important to look at both processes and participation in activities as precursor to subsequent outcomes, as the changes that we mentioned. Again, if you're working in multi-level initiatives, it's important to track trends over time, but also to collect the data at these different levels at the same time, and then look at where and when changes are happening at these different levels. Recognizing that individual and organizational change often happens before larger scale change. System change, as you can see from the different leverage points, is multidimensional. So don't rely on a single indicator, such as, did the jail population drop? Think of a more nuanced cluster of indicators so that you can track early change or less visible change, as well as obvious change in things like population change. We also want to ensure that these measures are designed and translated into appropriate languages, working and is grounded in the experience and lived experience of the people who are most impacted by the initiative that you're working on. So you've heard some of this from other sessions, but we wanted to emphasize these in this session as well. So let's go to the next element, which is looking at analyzing the data. And this goes back to Chandria.
So employing clusters of measures and multi-dimensional indices, as Meg just mentioned, is crucial for comprehensively capturing the complexity of system conditions. And by utilizing a variety of metrics and indices encompassing different dimensions of the system, such as the social, economic, and environmental factors, a more holistic evaluation can be achieved. Furthermore, disaggregating data by location and population allows for a nuanced analysis that acknowledges the diversity of experiences within the system and ensuring that the evaluation is inclusive and equitable. And so integrating participatory processes into the analysis and interpretation of findings is vital for ensuring that perspectives of those most affected by the change are central to the evaluation process. And by engaging interested parties directly in interpreting data, insights can be contextualized and enriched with local knowledge and experience. And one method for doing that is through a data party. So I often like to ask how many people have heard of data parties or used data party. And so if you've heard of a data party or used it, drop it into the chat in terms of when you might have used it. But for those of you who data parties is new, data parties are also known as participatory analysis, sense making, results briefings, or data walks. But essentially, they're a participatory technique for including diverse voices in reviewing and interpreting data prior to drafting a final report or plan of action. And there are many reasons to host data parties, including improving interpretation of your findings, increasing audience capacity to understand and use data, empowering and affirming community or participant voice and lived experience, and identifying what data might still be needed, and increasing buy-in and informing better programming and policies. There are several methods that can be employed as part of a data party. And these include things like data placemats, where you share graphs of data for discussion, data walks, which are typically done in person, and it's used for examining data, large amounts of both qualitative and quantitative data. You can use trend timelines to discuss changes over time, or you can use the 1-2-4-all method, which is a type of groupthink for interpretation and discussion. And many of these strategies that are employed as part of data parties can be used both virtually and in person. So no matter what technique you choose, it's important to have a kind of understanding of what it might look like to implement a data party. So we provided here a reflection, an opportunity for you to think about what it might look like to host a data party through this scenario. So imagine you're part of a task force responsible for evaluating the effectiveness of an early childhood education systems change initiative for your community. Your task force comprises representatives from local government, educators, parents, and community organizations. And the goal is to ensure that all children, regardless of background, have access to high quality early childhood education that supports their development and prepares them for success in school and beyond. You have finished all of your data collection and you want to host a data party for the task force. So in the chat, respond to some of these questions if you would. What data would be most important to analyze and co-interpret in this situation? How might different cultural backgrounds influence the interpretation of data? And what equity considerations should be taken into account when hosting a data party and looking at your data? So I'll give you a couple of seconds to kind of think about that, and feel free to drop your thoughts and reflections into the chat. And so one thing that I want you to think about when hosting a data party is make sure that you have some reflection questions to help your participants really understand how they should approach the data. So reflection questions could include things like, what did these data tell you? Or what surprises you about the data? Or how does it align with your expectations? What factors may explain some of the trends that you're seeing? Or does this lead to any new questions? And what recommendations would you provide based on these findings? And how might we best communicate these findings? So these were all just ways to ensure that you're including participant voice in your data analysis process. And I'll turn it over to Brandon for report and using findings.
Okay, thank you, Chandra. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. All right, so I'm just going to briefly highlight some considerations around reporting and using findings as part of the framework. And so one thing to consider is that sharing in promoting use of findings really is a fundamental responsibility of an evaluator. CREE highlights the importance of being attentive to culture and background for effective communication. For example, using linguistically inappropriate dissemination approaches and preventing findings in ways that are transparent and meaningful to groups and communities that are at the center of evaluation. So I won't go through all the elements and principles that you see here, but I would just highlight some key considerations, for example, around meaningfully addressing accessibility barriers and other kinds of barriers to being able to access evaluation findings. In producing your how you deliver your findings, balancing key takeaways with background to support an interpretation. So, for example, being thoughtful about how one is focusing on key findings and recommendations that are relevant to specific groups. The main takeaways those audiences should have to increase their awareness or increase understanding or promote action. Stating things in plain language with sufficient reasoning support the recommendations or the findings, while at the same time, providing enough background information on the project purpose, the scope, the methods, limitations of those methods, and other considerations around the evaluation to help audience members make independent meaning of the results, really facilitating that co-analysis and co-interpretation process that Chandra mentioned. Then also encouraging use in dialogue, highlighting the implications, the relevance, the potential impact of the findings, while also being prepared for feedback in responding to that feedback from audience members in respectful ways. And then just being careful about how success is defined and making sure that it's tailored in a way that gives an understanding of, are we truly ensuring that information is getting into the hands of our target audiences, especially those groups that might typically be harder to reach. So again, we'd invite you just to please reflect on other strategies you might have used in the past to report and use findings in equitable ways. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hiro for some reflection and discussion.
Thank you so much. This was so comprehensive, and I think I hope it's not too overwhelming to folks, but I feel like no matter what stage you're at in an evaluation process, you'll find a lot of strategies here that are really useful. So I was going to actually go in depth into, but briefly into one example where I think we've used a lot of these principles in a set of research that is specific to ECD in humanitarian contexts and related to the Rohingya in Cox's Bazar with a lot of partners and a very diverse set of partners. And this was focused on ECD programs grounded in the experiences and culture of Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. And we did face a challenge here, which is that there was virtually no research, as this was an indigenous and stateless group in Myanmar, with very little access to ECD services. And the goals of this project had been to understand their context of socialization, the experiences of the refugee camp context. It's the largest refugee camp in the world, and a lot of different kinds of research, including impact evaluation, but really several years of research on culture and child development prior to that. And as many of you know, this is a exodus of nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees from Rakhine province into Bangladesh, starting the second half of 2017. And these are crowded and relatively hazardous conditions, but I do want to emphasize that if we take a cultural systems view, what we found was a lot of cultural adaptation to this new ecology of restricted movement, crowding, and new vulnerabilities. And what we saw is really only possible to analyze using a systems lens, which is a lot of rapid adaptation of kinship structures, adaptation to a set of entirely new livelihoods, rapid learning of multiple languages, and a very complex multi-system context of the Bangladeshi government and camp authorities, local and international NGOs and UNHCR, as well as the Rohingya social structures. And this was really a emergent cultural holistic change, which we could really only study using a whole variety initially of qualitative methods that were tailored to what was feasible in the context of constantly changing COVID restrictions in that context. And so I just wanted to quickly give you a couple instances of this. The first was to actually do qualitative work to uncover cultural conceptions of well-being. And we used this technique called free listing to understand, because the Rohingya language does not entirely overlap with the local Bangla dialect, what their local cultural meanings of concepts of distress or play or parenting were. And these were used to understand from a really cultural perspective, with a lot of open-ended interviews and then key informant interviews, what the meaning of particular concepts were. And this was an example. We then would use these to develop survey measures that went alongside the more standardized measures of things like depression or anxiety. And so this was really important for us to understand the specific language contexts of the Rohingya. Another example was this difficulty of doing kind of long, sustained ethnography, but we were able to do rapid ethnography to observe how children play. And these were literally observations of 15 to 20 minutes of children in their natural environments, but they showed a lot of patterns in our field notes of how children adapt their play to these kind of often hazardous environments, and are playing in mixed age peer groups, not same age peer groups. Interviews with fathers and mothers that also kind of revealed their patterns and concerns about children. And so this was an example of something that was adapted to humanitarian and limited resource context. The last approach was community participatory workshops. There's been a lot of comments in the chat about what to do with limited resources. And so though we wanted to do full-on participatory action research with community members, we ended up developing workshops that were each about 5 days long, one on community engagement and one on the specific experiences of pregnant Rohingya mothers. And so this was an example of how Rohingya refugees can participate in the planning of future ECD programs, as well as document the participatory process that was used by the NGO BRAC to develop the humanitarian play lab model in this context in 2017. And so we were able to answer research questions with a diverse set of Rohingya members, community leaders, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, as well as practitioners, and kind of boiled down a participatory action kind of approach into a 5-day workshop that produced a lot of really wonderful art. And these are kind of an exercise around the DREAM early childhood program that they would plan, and developed a conceptual framework that the participants led that included new themes around transitions to primary school or addressing the physical environment. So the lessons that we draw here, which are related to what was presented by the NORC team, include the fact that a diverse evaluation team on our end had members with refugee, indigenous, and multiple local languages represented. We've found that practice-embedded researchers, the monitoring and evaluation staff in the NGO, and then folks on our team who have backgrounds in NGOs and practice in these cultural contexts, working together in analysis teams was really important. We tried to pay attention to power differentials as a global North institution by using those participatory methods while remaining feasible. This occurred in a sustained multi-year partnership. We partnered with both large and very small local NGOs, and we used multiple qualitative and quantitative methods. So those are just some lessons I think are really useful from about 150 different strategies that I think were outlined by the team. And so, yeah, so I would like, I was wondering if the NORC team wanted to address any of the other Q&A that had come up, because a lot of great questions came up, and we have about 10 minutes left. Sorry to rush through those slides, but I think those can be shared by the ECTAN team if folks are interested. I don't know who on the...
Jackie, who asked us the questions? Should we pick through them, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah. Okay. So, but while I do that, do you guys have any reflections on what Hero shared really quickly?
I just want to thank Hero for this very, very intense research and evaluation piece that he did in a very difficult context, and just showcase some of the great methods that we only talked about in abstract, but you lived them. You had a diverse team that understood the subject and the research methods. You worked really hard on the language issues and being able to do in situ observations without having, this full ethnographic approach, being very adaptive to the context. I was just so impressed with the creativity and the adaptation that you showed in the work that you did. I was just so appreciative of that example. I don't know if others had comments.
So I wanted to jump in, a very practical question actually that's come up for both the NORC team and Hero yourself as well, is both in terms of planning time. How much time does all of this process take, and cost? I think those are the two big questions that people are asking, sorry.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit with those examples. Full-on participatory action research often takes multiple years because you are working with a team, even identifying the team and all of that. So this took a lot of planning, but we decided to boil it down to 5-day workshops. But what we do is then, as resources permit, we do a series of them. So we've done, I think, 3 so far, and a 4th is in the planning, so that they're kind of iterative, but each of them is relatively low cost and relatively short. And then the analysis is probably not the kind of full-on qualitative publishable analysis, but in order to iterate, we do a kind of much more rapid process. And data parties are a great idea because you can get a lot done and get a lot of buy-in as well, and you feedback results to stakeholders and get their input. It's hard sometimes to feed that back to every single stakeholder person who was in your research, but we try to get at least a representative sample and get some diversity in that group in the data party, I guess. And oh, there was some music. One of them were folks were performing, so maybe that was a party.
And I do think that, you know, for these types of inclusive and equitable processes, you know, it does take time. It takes time to build these relationships and it takes time to engage people. I think when it comes to participatory analysis and sense making, there are ways to kind of streamline the time and costs associated with it. We've had great success hosting data parties virtually, and there are, you know, different considerations in doing that. But if you're wanting to convene people on a platform like Zoom, you can use things like data placemats to share the data and kind of have breakout rooms for a conversation and things like that that can help make it be a little bit more cost efficient.
Great. I'm going to read out two questions to both for the panelists. One is, when deciding who is most impacted by an evaluation, is that always the same as who is most impacted by the initiative or project, or can that be quite different? For example, community members and users of the program might not be impacted by the evaluation per se, but the funder might be very much affected by the evaluation if the results determine the funder's own ability to get more money for its programs. And then the next question also, I mean, Yulia, you've been asking some great questions. How can this work be adapted to serious structural constraints some of us face in our positions? For example, it can render federal government evaluations practically impossible to engage community members in their design because of the rigid rule system surrounding such engagements and long convoluted clearance processes to get approvals and evaluations. And I encourage the NORC team, since there's so many of you online, to please answer as many questions as you can in the Q&A, because there's some really great questions and it would be a shame to not have those answered. So NORC team, please, if you can divide and conquer and be responding to questions as well, so that colleagues can read them. All right, I think those are the last two questions we have time for. Go ahead.
Well, I want to answer the resource question, or the how much time it takes. I think that if you really do need to create a respectful agreement with the community on all aspects of the evaluation, so that there isn't a roadblock later on. You've worked out and negotiated everything beforehand, and so that really does, you know, go slow to go quick later is important. I also think that I'll let the others answer the other two questions, but I just want to emphasize that it's foolhardy to rush over the beginning parts of this work.
I thought it was an excellent point around the diversity of the stakeholders. And what we've done with our data parties or our results workshops is have at least a couple different kinds, one of which is local, where the data were collected, which in that case is in Cox's Bazar. The other is in the Capitol with the funders and with national stakeholders. So those are a little bit more external facing. And so those, but are also collaborative and are asking for input. So I think thinking of a variety of stakeholders makes sense. And then structural constraints, absolutely. Both ministry, in this case, camp authorities, there's a lot of approvals. And those have just probably another of the reasons that we shortened a lot of our research methods from our original plans. So I think that's a really good point. And there is no way of getting around those structural constraints. We just have to work around them.
Chandra or Brandon, any final thoughts?
I think with respect to the question about stakeholder identification or interested party identification, I think I would just add that, you know, as you're going through that process to analyze who those interested parties are, you know, as you're thinking through, certainly that someone who might be closer to the implementation of the program might have maybe a greater interest or more direct impact in some ways to the from the evaluation. Still, the results with respect to how they'll be used and how they might transform or adapt that program are going to have a downstream impact on those who are participants or are impacted by the initiative. So just one thing I'd consider there.
Great. I do want to close because we're at time, but there are two questions that I feel are so important. So if we can get like quick, rapid questions. One is, how can a single small size not-for-profit conduct a systems evaluation? You know, that's one. And the other one is around, let me just quickly, in regards of persons with disabilities, how the systems thinking approach is considered. And there are a couple of questions about, you know, what does systems thinking about disability inclusion address? How is it addressed, etc. So really quick, if we can just address these two and then we'll close out.
So I can say about how can a small organization do a systems evaluation. I want you we included the next session is about a very small foundation with just a very small evaluation team, a couple people who actually work at a community level and with a small budget are able to do a great systems evaluation work that includes storytelling. So please, if you can, listen to that. It's on a small budget, small team in a specific region. You can do systems evaluation, so don't shy away.
And really quickly to the question around disability, ensure that people with lived experience are on your team. So ensure that people who are part of the disability community are part of your team and involved with your evaluation. And that's how you can ensure that their voice is included.
Excellent. Shreya, do you want to screen share so I can rapidly close us out? Amazing session to the NORC team, Meg, Chandria, Brandon, Hero. Colleagues, as always, the certificate is here. I do want to flag something. Some of us are getting really clever and are trying to short circuit the system by completing the surveys for sessions that are not even completed. We will be looking at timestamps and those surveys will be deleted. So please don't pre-complete surveys. We request that if you can be as thoughtful with your responses, that would be great. Shreya, can you actually put on the slide for the next session that's happening? So the next session that's happening in about 30 minutes is a session on the qualitative methods, using stories to drive systems change and learning with Freya Bradford, Jessica Conrad, and Mark Tomlinson. So we hope you can join us in half an hour. All right, and then we go quickly to tomorrow's sessions. We're moving on tomorrow. We're getting close to the end of the series. Join us for session 9 with Johnny Morrell and Aisha Yousafzai on how does knowledge of complex systems behavior help us to do better planning and evaluation, and session 10 on complexity aware monitoring approaches for adaptive and context-specific program improvement. All right, guys, with that, we're going to close. Sure, we're just going to close the session now since we're over time. Please go over to connect.ecdan.org to chat. And of course, a big thank you to the ECDAN team who's been working hard behind the scenes. All right, thanks everyone. Thank you to the NORC team. Bye, Hero. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.